Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I welcome you to the 7th week in an 8-week series titled Celebrating Humor and Music. And as I have been saying for the past few weeks, that the format we're using is called the Chautauqua format, in which you bring scholars to your program, in this case, and also to our campus, in which those scholars portray someone in history. And then on our program here, we actually pretend we're interviewing that famous person from history. So today I welcome to the program Mr. Mark Twain. And as you know, Mark Twain was incredibly famous, and he was an American humorist, a satirist, a writer, and a lecturer. Wrote such famous works and novels as The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. With that, since you're so well known, Mr. Twain, we'll go right on with the program, and thank you for being so gracious to do this program with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And as always, I'm pleased to have our two regular panelists. First of all is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Erna Reinhardt, who is Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College. And Janelle Burke will start today's questioning.
Welcome to the program, Mr. Twain. It's a pleasure to have you here. One of your early adventures was with your brother, and you went west with your brother. Can you tell us a little bit about that adventure and perhaps how you met some wild animals?
Well, we went west because Orion had worked in Lincoln's campaign and got himself appointed as secretary to the territorial governor in Nevada, and I was green with envy. Here, hapless Orion was going to go out and have an adventure, and I was going to stay behind in Missouri. But then he invited me to be his own private undersecretary, in part because he couldn't afford the ticket, and I could. I was making $250 a month piloting on the river. Of course, the Civil War put an end to piloting. I was not about to stand in that pilot house, all glass and gingerbread, with the Confederates on one side and the Union guns on the other, because the pilot house would be the only thing they'd hit. So I took the last boat back to Hannibal, back to St. Louis, and then on to Hannibal. And I took his invitation, bought the tickets. We left from St. Joseph out to Nevada, and had those wonderful adventures. We arrived out there and established ourselves in a lovely French boarding house run by Katie O'Leary, and began to settle into the desert. And while I was there, I wisely invested my money in silver mining and lost it all. But I wasn't worried because Orion had an income, and I invested all that for him and lost all that. So then I was looking for work and began to write for the Territorial Enterprise up in Virginia City, and was always pleased when they published my articles. And then wrote later for the Morning Call out in San Francisco. We would go to every theater every night and stay just long enough to have something to write, and published it in the morning.
Now, on your way out west, you encountered some rather large animals, buffalo to be exact.
We did. It's the first time I'd ever seen such animals. And I wrote about one who chased a traveler across the plains. The traveler found a tree, but the buffalo came up the tree right after him. He shot every bit of the bullets he had in his gun to discourage the buffalo, but it kept coming and coming. Until almost the last minute when it decided that it didn't want to come all the way to the top of the tree. And I can't vouch for that story, but I can tell you this, that there was a lot of buffalo And though there weren't many trees, something like that was bound to have happened.
Thank you.
Erna Reinhardt.
Mr. Twain,
Erna.
welcome to the show.
Thank
It's
you.
great to have you here. You have done so many things in your life. You've written, you've given a lot of speeches, you've been very, very famous. Share with us and our viewers just a couple of highlights of what was a very special moment for you.
Well, a special moment was a moment when I married. I met my wife in the Bay of Smyrna. We were on a trip to the Holy Land, and her brother Charlie had an image of her in a little locket, and he showed that, and I fell in love with her right away. I wrote to my mother that I was going to harass that girl until she said yes. And when we returned, I met her, and shortly after that, invited her to marry me. And of course she said no, which was good. That showed she'd been brought up right. But then she admitted one Wednesday night that indeed she loved me. But she hoped it'd pass and go away.
Did you say it was a Wednesday night?
It was. And then the next Wednesday, she acknowledged that she loved me and was proud. So then her father asked me to provide letters of reference. He said she was going to inherit $250,000 when her father died because he was a great coal magnate. And he was deathly afraid that somebody would take advantage of his daughter, Olivia Langdon. And so I wrote to ministers and other upstanding people out west that I had met, and they all wrote back. And one day he came to me and said he would like to visit with me in the parlor. And he showed me the letters. He said, "Don't you have any friends out there?" One said, I would fill a drunkard's grave. Another that I'd make ill use of my talents. And trusting a daughter to me would be the last thing that this other fellow would do. So I said, "Well, I suppose I don't have friends out there if they write like that." He said, "Well, I know you better than they do, so you take the girl." And so we married. And it was a very happy marriage for us. And she helped me edit my books for more than a quarter of a century. She was my editor and very faithful. Scratching out all the passages that were not appropriate for genteel readers, and she found more than a few.
And did you have children?
We did. Langdon, the boy, who only lived about 18 months, named after his grandfather. And then we had 3 girls. Susie, the oldest, had the most literary talent. And then Clara, who had the musical talent, and the youngest was Jean. I buried both Livy and 2 of the girls. Clara is married, though, to a musician, attended her wedding, and it kind of outdressed the bride because I'd just gotten an Oxford cap and gown, and I wore that to her wedding. I don't know that she approved, but anyway, I needed someplace to show that off, and did.
Great.
I introduced you, of course, as a great humorist and wonderful writer, and even after your death in 1910, I think you'd even be more greatly appreciated and read, and students all over the world read your writings. And so in one of your statements you made, I'd like you to share with the viewers, you had a wonderful thing to say about something called laughter. How powerful is it?
Well, it is the only real defense that we have in our poverty to protect our liberties, because persuasion, money, supplication, persecution, these can all lift at a colossal humbug, push them a bit, century by century, but laughter can blow it all to rags and atoms at a blast. Against the assault of laughter, nothing
Stands against it.
No, I don't think so.
Earlier today, at our forum, I was able to have a dialogue with you and Will Rogers, and we will have him on next week with you, which I know our viewers will tune in for that one. But a couple of words I'm going to do on this show, because we did it and I thought it went so well. And in your writings, one of the things that you talked about was religion, and you talked about heaven and hell. And share with our viewers something from your writing in relation to the word religion.
Well, people are funny. The greatest passion on earth, it does not exist in heaven. Human beings don't do that in heaven. And you'd never be able to guess in a million years what the substitute for that, unless you went regularly to hymn singing. Going to sing hymns for a night. You can't get people to sing for an hour in church on Sunday, but that's what they're going to do forever in heaven. I have my doubts about people. The damned human race, could do better with its time, I think, than invent otherworldly pleasures that are so false that they wouldn't hold up on this earth. I wrote a book called Captain Stormfield's Visit to Heaven. Livy forbade me ever to let that see the light of day. It'll be published next Christmas season, in time for the Christmas trade, just the Christmas after Livy died. I got it out and read it again, and there wasn't a thing wrong with it. It's about a fellow who raced comets going to heaven and arrived at the wrong gate for his kind. But he found the proper gate and was admitted, and he asked for a harp and a halo and a cloud to sit on, and sat next to another fellow and started to strum the harp, and the fellow next to him said, "Sonny, don't you know another tune than that one?" He said, "No, that's the only one." He said, "Well, eternity is a long time to hang with one tune." He said, "Let's knock off." And I said, "I never wanted to knock off so bad in my life as I did after that first day in heaven."
Janelle Burke.
I would like to ask you about some of your writings. Today, when you spoke to the students, Mr. Twain, you talked a little bit about Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn.
Good.
And perhaps you can kind of compare those two books and talk about those. And then some of your other favorite writings that you would suggest that people read if they would like to read something about your writings that show your philosophy of life, because you did incorporate that into your writings in a great deal.
I did. A writer, any more than a humorist, should not preach. But one always does if one wishes to last forever. Must have some message. Tom Sawyer is just a hymn to boyhood. He's no more serious than that. Tom is a fun-loving child who does all kinds of pranks and doesn't get punished for them. In all the other books up to that time, even including Aldrich's books, bad children got punished inside the book, but not Tom and Huck. I mean, they turned up at their own funeral after driving their parents and the city and the village. They were just crazy worrying about them. But they thought that was a great fun, and they just got hugs and rewards as a result. In my account, Huckleberry Finn is something else, though. By that book, Tom has become a meddlesome, manipulative child. And when the runaway slave, Jim, is found, and Tom turns up, knowing that he has been manumitted in his mistress' will, he doesn't tell Jim, doesn't tell anybody, in order to have fun with Jim. And when Huck finds this out, he said, "Why did you go to all that trouble to free somebody who's already free?" "Oh," he said, "for the fun of it, for the adventure of it, and I'd will him to my children, if I could." And that's where the country was. We would continue to will to our children that property. Though after the Civil War, by 15 years, by the time Huck Finn came out, that issue had been settled. But it hadn't really been settled.
So it was really a mirror
was.
You were holding up.
It was, and that was due to William Dean Howells, who was the leading literary critic in the country and a dear friend. He thought Emerson, writing about the ideal world, but that's not what a writer ought to do. He ought to write about this world so really that we recognize ourselves. And that's why that racial epithet, nigger, was used over and over in the book in order to say to the reader, this is how you sound, how do you like it? Some people didn't notice. The word had become so much part of their prejudice that it wasn't even visible to them when they saw it in the mirror. But that's the writer's duty. I think Howells is right about that.
Reinhardt.
You were extremely popular, but you also had many critics.
Yes.
So I'm here to ask you a tough question. What was it about yourself that your critics didn't like?
I think the truth. The truth. The truth hurts, though, as I said just recently, that there's nothing spoils good literature is too much truth. Truth is the most precious thing we have, and we should economize it. But that foolishness aside, if you get cut too close to the bone, it can hurt a bit. And so my children, like Huck Finn, talk the language that children talk. Their parents don't like that. They don't want to hear that. And so the moral icebergs at the Concord Public Library said that the book was rough, coarse, and inelegant, and not worthy of our moral young people. Of course, our moral young people are just like Tom and Huck. They use that kind of language, and of course, around behind the barn, they smoked the same kind of cigars that we all did. I was humiliated once. A little girl in Hannibal said, "Imagine that, he's 7 years old and doesn't smoke." So I proved that I could. Oh, I was so sick. But ever since that, I've only smoked in moderation, one cigar at a time.
Well, Mark Twain, you, as we've said on the show already, you did so much. It was hard to even know in a short show or program how much to talk about certain things. You did a lot of lecturing too.
I did. I could always make money lecturing. When the books wouldn't sell, I could always lecture and make money at it. But it was so tiresome being on the road and staying in strange hotels.
But you did that across the country, didn't you?
I did, and it was difficult because the local moderator would always want to introduce me, and the introductions would be embarrassing, and they would go on for too long. But I remember in Red Dog out in California one time, a fellow said, "I don't know much about this man. I know he hasn't been in the penitentiary, but I don't know why." That was the introduction. And one time I got to a town late and just followed the crowd. There was not a committee at the train station to meet me. I just followed the crowd up to the theater, and I went in. I said to the ticket taker, I said, "I'm the lecturer." He said, "You're the fourth lecturer that's tried to get in here tonight, and you're going to pay." And so it was easier to pay than not.
And your audiences they varied greatly in their history background and how they reacted to the lectures.
Oh, they were favorable. The first lecture that I ever gave in San Francisco, I did the posters put up around town myself. I said that the doors open at 7 and the trouble starts at 8. And it did. When I got on stage, I was just frozen with stage fright for a full 2 minutes. I couldn't open my mouth. Finally, I relaxed enough to begin to talk. I had taken the forethoughtfulness to plant people in the audience who would laugh at my jokes at the right time, but found I didn't need them to stampede the audience. There was lots of laughter, and the next day the reviews were kind, and I thought all's well that ends well.
You also indicated in some discussions we've had that you're a prolific writer and did so much, but a lot of your writings and articles and all you did it too because that's how you made your living. So,
Well, it was a living, yes.
so it was very important to you to produce volume.
Oh, it was. Well, when I got married, my father-in-law gave us a house to live in and servants to run it. So I began, to live beyond my means the first day of our marriage, and lived always beyond my means. And finally, though, realized that I couldn't make enough money without investing and make the money that way. So I invested, and that's how I lost it. But I tried to invest wisely. I invested in the Page typesetting machine, but Morgenthaler brought his out first. A man by the name of Alexander Graham Bell came by one time, and he wanted to sell stock in his telephone. And I said, I've made some bad investments, but none this bad. And so I did not invest in the telephone. Now I have one in my house that everybody's always using and calling. I'm about ready to take it out.
It sounds like myself, a lot of us, we're not very perceptive where we should invest.
That's right. It's hard to know.
It's really hard to know.
But I did invest all of Livy's money. And that was lost, too. And that's when we went around the world to try to recover. I think Livy's happiest day after Susie died was the day that she wrote All Bills Paid. Mm-hmm. And that took quite a few years. Henry Rogers said I could declare bankruptcy. He was a businessman. And that was his advice, and I did, which meant that I didn't have to pay 100 cents on a dollar for my debts. But Livy would have nothing to do with it. She said an honest person would pay it all, bankruptcy or not. And that's what we did.
Mm-hmm. Janelle Burke.
Mark Twain, you just alluded to the fact that you did some traveling, and many of your books were written about travels.
Most of the books were travel books, that's right.
So tell us about a couple that are your favorites, and then also about traveling to the Middle East.
Yes. Well, the first travel that I did outside of the United States was to Europe and the Holy Land. We went on one of the first pilgrimages and excursions on the Quaker City paddle steamer across the Atlantic, and had a great time. It was Henry Ward Beecher organized it, and he thought he was going to get General Sherman to go along, but Sherman backed out, and Beecher himself backed out, and I was the only celebrity on it. Everybody else was a pious pilgrim. And it would have been a fine, wasn't much of an excursion, but it would have been a dandy funeral if we'd have had a corpse along. We like to irritate tour guides. I remember one that showed us Christopher Columbus. I said, "That's wonderful. Is he in?" And then in the Holy Land, they began to collect all kinds of souvenirs. You could rebuild the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in this country with all souvenirs that people brought back from that place. In Rome, we saw everything Michelangelo made. Along at the beginning, it was wonderful. We had Michelangelo for breakfast, we had Michelangelo for lunch, we had Michelangelo for dinner. Finally got tired of him, when you learned that he died, you were just disappointed that you weren't there to see him do it. We traveled around the world, finally. Livy and Clara and I went out to Vancouver, lectured in little tiny towns like Crookston, Minnesota, and Winnipeg, and in Manitoba and Canada and Vancouver, and then out to Australia and New Zealand and India, and had a wonderful time. Went to South Africa and then back to England. And there it was that we learned that Susie was ill with meningitis and finally died. I don't know how parents ever recover from something like that. I don't think Livy ever did, really. But Clara then nursed her during her final illness and lied to her every day about her condition, and used to invent stories, make up things, to the point where she got suspicious. Clara would describe Jean's new wardrobe, which of course she hadn't bought. And finally, her mother said to tell her that she was spending too much money on clothes.
On that note, we have to bring the program to another point, and what we've been doing, ladies and gentlemen, is at this point we take our guest out of character, out of the Chautauqua character, and introduce who they are. And our guest is Dr. George Frein, who is a professor of philosophy and religion. He earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy from Glennon College in St. Louis, Missouri, his bachelor's degree in divinity from St. Louis Theological Seminary, his master's degree in history from St. Louis University, and his PhD in religion from Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. George has been a friend for a very long time, and this is his third appearance at North Idaho College, and he does other characters. And he was a professor for many years at the University of North Dakota. He's now an adjunct professor of religion at Furman University. And George, what a pleasure to have you here. And you've been doing Mark Twain for many, many years.
I have 10 or more years. And you'd think with all that education, I would know something.
Well, you really are a master, and I've often said that what makes this such a wonderful format is that when people are as good as you are, and a scholar like you, that when people come into the audience, they really, really believe that they have had an experience with Mark Twain, that they've gone back in time. And so we think, and you're going to be with us again next week when we have you and Will Rogers on together.
Again.
Well, thank you for being with us. It's been a pleasure.
It's always a delight to be at North Idaho College.
And you're so generous with your time, and what a gentleman you are. It's just absolutely wonderful. And as I indicated, ladies and gentlemen, we have one more week in our 8-week series on dealing with celebrating humor and music. And as I indicated, next week's program will include a conversation with Mark Twain and Will Rogers, and I'm sure you want to be here to hear them have dialogue with one another. And we certainly invite you to do that. Until next week, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station. Welcome to Public